Now, if you clicked play on this, you're either a really big Jeff Porcaro fan or you're a really big fan of Rich Mangicaro. Either one. Tonight's topic for this very first episode of Drum Corner Radio, it's a doozy. It's great. I had a great conversation with Rich. We talk a whole lot about Jeff, his drumming, and the music that he made during the time that he was here. I enjoyed this conversation so much that I wanted to make sure that we put this here for you to listen to. Now, because of music licensing and copyright issues, we've had to extract all of the songs from this version of the show. So you're going to get the conversation that Rich and I had about Jeff and about his drumming. Now, if you want the show in its entirety, there are two ways to get it. You can either go to drumcorner.net, and if you're one of our All Access Pass students, you can go to the archive and get this show in its entirety behind that paywall. Or if you're one of my patrons over at brianstevens.net, if you're a member of the Cosmic Clubhouse, we're going to post this entire episode there for our patrons. And so if you're not a member of one of those sites, swing by, jump on, grab a subscription. All of these shows will be archived week to week in both of those places. But for now, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Rich Mangicaro about Jeff Porcaro. Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of Drum Corner Radio. I'm your host, Brian Stevens, and today we're going to talk about Jeff Porcaro. And the whole purpose of this show and the reason why we're starting this show here on AMP really started from working with some of my students. A couple of them I see right now that are listening here on Drum Corner Radio. Hey, Paul, how's it going? The thing that I've noticed with some of my students that are all under 30, I would name drummers and talk about drum parts and play things for them. And they really didn't know who some of these amazing drummers were that I grew up with and that you probably grew up with. And so I thought, what's a great way that I could begin to do something that my students can listen to, that friends can listen to, that you can listen to. So each week, I'm going to pick a drummer, and we're going to talk about that drummer, talk to him about his background, talk about some of the gear that he used, some of my favorite tunes, and why they're my favorite tunes. And like tonight, we're going to have a very, very special guest that we're going to talk about this particular drummer's cymbals, and someone who has the inside track on some great information for that. Anyway, let me just get us started with one of my favorite Jeff Porcaro tracks. There's a great record. It's the very first Michael McDonald solo record. And the track that most people know from this particular album is a song called I Keep Forgetting. It was sampled in the 90s for a hip-hop tune with Warren G. And I will play the Warren G tune, and my students will know that. But that's not the track I want to play for you. About half of this album is Jeff Porcaro, and the other half of this album is Steve Gadd. And it's very easy to tell the difference. And at some point, we'll talk about maybe what the differences are and their approaches on this album. But I'm going to play a song for you to start off the show. And this is a tune called That's Why. That's Why by Michael McDonald with Jeff Porcaro on drums. And this is playing behind the scenes. I'm talking with my guest today. My guest today, let's go ahead and get Rich in here, is Rich Mangicaro. I've known Rich since 96, 97. He's the reason why I'm an artist endorser for Paiste. He's not the reason I started using Paiste. Jeff's the reason I started using Paiste. But the reason that I got the hookup with Paiste and have been with them ever since and have been so happy is this man right here, Rich Mangicaro. Say hello to everybody, Rich.
Hey, everybody. Nice to be with you.
So there are a lot of things about having you on the show that make this super, super special. Not only were you around and involved in the scene at the time, you were integral to what was going on with artists and Paiste during that whole time. So I figured if I'm going to talk with anybody about Jeff's gear and about Jeff's life and the stuff that he did as far as sessions, I'd be hard pressed to find someone that would know more than you.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, we were very close, and we really, it's funny, we became close instantly. We had a bond that was not just musical, but more familial. Both of our families are from a certain part of Italy, very, very small region in southern Italy, and we kind of bonded over that.
Yeah.
And I was very close with his father as well, and his whole family. I really still am. So when we met in 1987 or 86 or 87, I think it was. And I knew him till he passed. And we just became tighter and tighter as time went on until we lost him so early. But out of all the artists I worked with, as you can imagine, Brian, out of all of the artists, and I worked with, a lot of the greats, it always messed me up to know that I was working with Jeff Porcaro, because I'm a small town guy. I'm from Syracuse, New York. And when I was growing up, all of my bands, we all listened to everything that he did. He was a huge influence on me. So when I was in that position and I, had to compose myself and and deal with him, and he took advantage of that. He loved busting my chops about being a small town guy, but we were very close. I feel very fortunate.
By the time you met him in 86, 87, he had already amassed a pretty huge amount of work. His discography was already huge at that point.
Right. And he was already a Paiste endorsee, but by that time I joined the company. There was a guy before me that I replaced that was with Yamaha for a long time after Paiste, named Steve Edelson.
Yep.
And Steve was kind of the early days of Paiste America, because Paiste became incorporated in early 80s, like 81 or something. And I came in 86 or so. And so Steve left, and I came on board as artist relations manager. So some of those artists had already been signed by Steve, and Jeff was one of them. But Jeff and I just clicked immediately.
At the time that you joined Paiste and you got to meet Jeff, do you remember what cymbals he was using at the time?
Yeah, I mean, at that time period, it was 2002s and 602s.
Yep.
That's kind of what was set up, but it just depended on what he was doing, because he had a bunch of different setups depending on the session or the live gig. I think more live, he was using 2002s. And in the studio, we used a combination of 2002s and 602s. But, shortly after I came aboard, I was involved with the creation of the signature line, and he was instrumental in helping us develop that line.
Oh, really? What do you remember what the things were that he was looking for as you guys were creating that signature line? What was he not getting out of the Paiste stuff he already had, or what sounds was he looking for to kind of stretch beyond what he had done?
It really wasn't so much that, as I was the liaison between the craftsmen in Switzerland and the artists in North America. So when they started working on this line, it was a whole new alloy that no one's ever used before. Okay. So it had a ton of new sound characteristics. So what I did was line up the meetings in America between Robert Paiste, Micheal Paiste, and the artists, and we would meet different artists in different cities and bring prototypes and play them together and get their feedback. And it was really eye-opening for everybody, because it was a whole new sound. It was not a sound anyone had really heard before. Yeah. And I remember Jeff immediately saying, this is the missing link, especially the full crashes in the signature series. He freaked out over the full crashes. It was like his dream crash.
Yeah.
And the sound edge hi-hats, which he didn't really use too much, but he was pretty impressed with that. But he was really impressed with the range of this alloy, because the alloy has such a wide range of frequencies from lows to highs, and a very balanced sound. That signature alloy is an extreme, you're an endorsee. Oh, yeah. So he was blown away with that. And immediately, he was like a fan immediately, and full crash became his symbol.
Yeah, and I've got, I think I've got full crashes in 16, 17, 18, maybe a 19 hanging out too. Like, they're amazing because they've got all that high end and that shimmer that you would expect out of any Paiste cymbal, but there's this lower kind of warmth to it that you might not get out of like a 2002 or even like a 602. You know, there's something about it. There's a body to it that's just completely different.
That's true.
The 2002s were the very first hi-hat I ever bought for myself when I was in college. My first year of college, I remember saving up because I remembered seeing a picture of Jeff playing some 2002s. I don't know if it might have been a live picture. And it just that particular logo is so iconic, that 2002 logo, that it stuck in my head. The second person I saw playing those was Alex Van Halen. So by the time both those guys ticked the box for me, I was like, okay. At the time I was 19, I'm thinking, I want to buy a set of 2002s. Two of my favorite drummers in the whole world at the time use those hi-hats. Yeah. And I still have them to this day. They're downstairs in my studio and they get used regularly.
Yeah, Alex was involved with this whole thing too. And he loved the signatures too, but he still kind of stuck with the 2002s with us. I mean, he ended up really liking that sound from, and he was influenced, of course, by Bonham, which... Yeah. You know, after 602s, Bonham went to 2002. So
I'd asked you earlier via email to give me a few of your favorite Jeff tunes, and one of the ones that was on your list was a Toto tune. One of the things I want to do as we do the show is play tracks that people may not have heard. Everybody knows about Rosanna. They know about certain tunes when we're talking about Jeff, but there's tunes that people don't know that they really need to hear. And one of those on your list was off of one of my favorite Toto records, the seventh one. It's Home of the Brave. What is it about that song that makes it one of your favorite Jeff Porcaro tracks?
It was one of these situations where Jeff had invited me down to a rehearsal, and they were getting ready to go on tour, and they were rehearsing that song, and he hadn't really played it really since the recording. So I was in the room with them when they were rehearsing the tune, and there's a breakdown in the middle, which is just a fantastic breakdown. Do you know it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And it's just killing. So I was in the room when they were working on that breakdown, and I was a fly on the wall watching him work that out, and seeing Jeff Porcaro make mistakes and getting frustrated and let's start it again was really, I just felt like, wow, I'm so fortunate, and it's just a burning track. It's just I don't know. It's just one of those tunes that I just love what he did on it, and just a great rock and roll tune that is a great break,
Well, I tell you what, let's let everybody hear that break. We're going to sit here for the next 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and we're going to check out Home of the Brave by Toto from their album, the seventh one. All right, so that's Home of the Brave off the seventh one album by Toto, and amazing drumming by Jeff Porcaro. A lot of people, they don't realize how much Jeff can stretch until you hear him play on tunes, or he's not just playing a basic groove and some nice little basic fills and stuff,
That's right.
Such a great track. One of the other songs that's on my list, I know you have a story about. So when we think of Bruce Springsteen, we think of Max Weinberg. Max Weinberg has been on most of the stuff that Bruce has recorded, but there's a whole album where Jeff shows up, and in particular, the song that I had earmarked to play, Human Touch. It's another great example of what somebody brings to the table. When you call a studio musician, you're not really just calling somebody to come in and, hey, can you play this beat for me? Boom, dat, boom, boom, dat. Especially when you're calling someone like a Jeff Porcaro, you're really calling someone to listen to the song and find what it needs. What does it need in terms of the groove? What does it need in terms of a very specific drum part that couldn't belong in any other song? That's why that we played earlier. That drum part couldn't fit in any other song. And Human Touch is another one of those where it's like the drum part's tailor-made for that tune. So you were there for that session when they did that?
So I'll tell you the story behind that. We had just introduced the Sound Formula line, which was kind of like the sister line to the Signature series. Same alloy, some different design. And we had a pair of hi-hats that he really wanted. And he really liked these hi-hats out of the Sound Formula line. So he said, hey, listen, I've got this session coming up. Bruce Springsteen's doing 2 albums back to back. And I've gotten call to do this one. And it's at A&M Studios, which is now called Henson here in Hollywood. But at A&M Studios. And can you bring me some things down to try? And so I went down to A&M, and he settled on this one pair of hi-hats, 14-inch. Oh, man, it's been so long, Brian. But I have to say the mediums. I think it was a medium 14 sound formula medium hats. And so we were in the room where the drums were, getting everything set up. He was doing a sound check, and then he goes, "Let's go out in the back." And there's an area. And have you worked at A&M before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so there's an area in A&M where there's a little lounge in the outside, like a patio, and there's a picnic table and blah blah blah. So he goes, "Let's go hang out in there until I'm ready." And so we went out there, and in quintessential Jeff fashion, he rolled this big fatty, and we shared a little smoke. And as David Crosby once told me, it was an adult dose. So because I had worked with David, and he had said that. I'll never forget that. But so we finished hanging out, and Jeff goes, "Okay, I'm going to go in," and he goes, and I'm walking with him, and he goes, "Bruce doesn't allow anybody into the tracking room when he's recording." I go, "Oh, okay, no problem." So I gave him a hug. We said goodbye, and I wasn't in the session when he tracked it, but I called him later on that day just to see how it went. And I said, "How was it?" He goes, "Oh, fine, man. First take."
First take.
So that track that you hear on the radio, that song is first take, one time through.
Goodness.
So, like you said, when Jeff, that's something that I don't think, and we talked about this recently with Jim Keltner on that tribute show that I was a guest on. There's nobody like him, because he was able to figure out a part and make it feel so good and it'd be the perfect part. I mean, Lenny Castro's like that on percussion too. It's just a perfect thing for that song. That's why they're who they are, and that's why Jeff was so unique, I think. And I really think that to this day, if Jeff was still with us, he'd be one of the greatest producers we've ever had.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Yeah, he had a huge set of ears, and it's pretty evident that Jeff was one of the first people that I ever noticed turning up on. This was when I was a kid. We're talking middle school. Like, he would be on albums. I just kept seeing this drummer's name. And even before I knew I wanted to be a drummer, I just knew there was something about his playing that really caught my ear. And the thing that I noticed even back then and have learned so much from to hopefully make me better as a studio player is how to hear all the way to the end of the song with just the very bare minimum that you're given. Sometimes you're just given a piano and a vocal, or a guitar and a vocal, and you've got to very quickly decide, what am I going to do based on what I hear in what could possibly be the end product.
Right.
So you're not making decisions just on the thing that's sitting in front of you. It's almost this ESP, or this intuition that you have of what's going to be there by the time the thing gets mixed.
Yeah.
And it if anything, it not only informs what you play, it also informs what you don't play.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. Where to use space, how to craft the lope of the song, and what not to play where, and how not to utilize too much because you want to paint that picture.
Yeah.
So totally. Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about Human Touch. We might as well play it. This is the title track off Bruce Springsteen's Human Touch record. And here's Jeff Porcaro on Human Touch. So we're sitting here listening to Human Touch and also talking about Chicago, and we're talking about all kinds of stuff. I love this format. I really appreciate everybody that's tuning in tonight and listening here on AMP to Drum Corner Radio. My guest tonight is Rich Mangicaro, who for a long time was the artist rep for Paiste cymbals, and then he later moved on. Now you're working with Gong Bop.
Yep.
The percussion company.
Right.
And for a long time, you were good friends with Jeff, and you were there to see a lot of stuff go down.
Yes.
That you really get to see it in person. The one thing that I've learned the last 10 years, because I've made it a point to try and seek out some of the people that I really love their playing, and get real FaceTime with them, and not just seeing them at a trade show or something, having a 3-hour lesson or 4-hour lesson where I sit with somebody. And as much as anything, be able to get 3 feet away from them. And just J.R. Robinson was one of those a few years back. Went out to L.A. for a couple of weeks and got about a half a day with J.R. And it was mainly, I mean, of course, I want to see his studio set up. I want to see how he does the things that he does. But as much as anything, it was to be able to get 3 feet away from him and just go, play something.
Yeah.
I want to see how you make the sound that you make without the mics, without the processing. So I can only imagine with Picaro, what was it like to sit there and be that close to someone? What was the sound like? How would you describe it?
Well, he used to say, it was interesting because he used to say he was very particular about cymbals, but as far as the drums, he wasn't as particular, although he's a Pearl endorsee, but he was more particular about the cymbals. But the drums, he would be able to get a sound out of anything, and that's because of the way he hit it. Yeah. And his sound was big, and it was round, and it was articulate, and he just had a way of striking the drum that had such conviction. When we listen to the great drummers, all the great drummers that we love listening to, whether it's Steve Jordan or whomever, I always think of Will Kennedy because he's one of my favorite players. There's a conviction with these guys. Yeah. When they play, it's a precise conviction that brings the sound out of the instrument. And Ndugu and I used to talk about that a lot too. And the sound of the instrument, bring the sound out of that instrument, and that's what it was like with him, with Jeff. And so he would get a great sound out of anything I heard him play on. He'd have like a couple different kinds of kits. I remember once I went and saw him at the Baked Potato here in Hollywood, and he had a brand new set of Brady drums he had just gotten from Kelly Brady in Australia. And he was so excited. And I walked in the door. He goes, "Man, get up here. Listen to this." And then he started hitting the toms and, these amazing, beautiful drums. I forget what kind of Australian wood it was, but he was so excited about it. And of course, sounded amazing that night. I don't know if you knew this, Brian, but he did not like doing solos. And
really?
Whenever we went and saw him, those of us lucky enough to be local and seeing him at the Baked Potato or any of the places in LA, he's not a solo guy. He didn't know. He just wants to groove with the band.
Sure.
And he could do a solo like beautifully.
Well,
and
of course.
He's got chops. He always had tons of chops, but that's not what he was about.
At some point, I remember seeing him sitting in a recording session behind a set of Gretsch drums.
Yes.
For some reason, that stuck in my mind. And again, what you see when you're young influences what you do when you're old. And I remember when I had enough money to really buy the drum set I'd always wanted, I bought a Gretsch kit. And the thing that was in the back of my mind was at some point, I saw a picture of Jeff Porcaro. And if I want to get the kind of sound, or if I want to start heading in the direction to have any chance of getting the kind of sound that I'm used to hearing on records of his, Gretsch might be the way to go. It wasn't Pearl. It wasn't the ads in the magazine. It was a picture of a session with him doing the thing that he was doing. Do you remember that at all? Like anything about him using Gretsch or something?
Yes. He had a Gretsch kit I saw him with once, and I don't remember I don't know if he had more than one, but I did see him with the Gretsch kit. I know he loved recording with that. And when he passed away, that Gretsch kit went to one of his sons. So I know one of his sons has that drum set now, but that was a kit that he loved recording with. I do remember that. Yeah.
It's those tones and sounds, and anytime I'm trying to get a sound for a record that I'm playing on or that I'm producing, that's my go-to. That's my starting point. Is all right. Well, we're going to pull out the Gretsch USA Custom and see if that's it, or I've got a round badge kit, like those classic tones, and he's definitely a direct influence of those things.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Chicago just a second ago. The last 2 weeks, I've had to spend a ton of time learning. I learned 45 Chicago tunes in a week, and then had a whole week to rehearse them for 2 shows. And when we usually think about Chicago, we think about Danny Seraphine.
Right.
And especially through the 70s and the early part of the 80s. But then there was a whole era once David Foster came in, where he started bringing in session musicians.
Right.
And Jeff was one of those people. And I remember as I was going through and doing my charts, one of the things that I made a point of doing was looking up who played on each tune. So not only did it help me in transcribing and understanding what I was meant to do, it really just put me in a different headspace tune to tune. So, if we're playing 25 or 64 or I'm a Man, it's a very different headspace than if we're playing You're the Inspiration or some of these other things. And so one of the tunes that I pulled to play tonight, because there's some very iconic fills in this song and some interesting choices. Again, this drum part couldn't fit in any other song. You couldn't just take the drums out, just mute everything else and record something else on top of it. It's too specific. It's the song Stay the Night from Chicago. And so while everybody's listening to this, I want you to listen. There's some fills in there, some 16-note triplet fills right next to these duple figures. So you get a lot of do-do-do-do. Those kind of little fills that it was definitely a nod towards Danny because it has a jazzy sound to it. It's not your jugga-dugga-gugum. There's some of those in there. But there's definitely a few fills that I feel like maybe Jeff played because it was a nod to Danny, but it wasn't a direct rip, So let's take a listen to this one. This is Stay the Night from Chicago. Jeff Porcaro on drums, not Danny Seraphim. So an unlikely place to hear Jeff Porcaro on a Chicago track, but that's one of them. That's Stay the Night by Chicago. There's a great book. You can't see it because we're on radio, but I'm holding it up. There's a book called It's About Time by Robin Flans. And in the back, she has a discography of tunes that Jeff played on, and it's 30 pages long. So one of the things that I did when I started going through this book is I started compiling a Spotify playlist and just spending time. A lot of these were familiar. The songs I'm playing for you tonight were very familiar songs. I'm going to play one that wasn't familiar at some point tonight. But for me, finally understanding what a studio musician does, it was around the same time that I got my 2002 hi-hats. I remember Paiste put out some kind of periodical. It looked like a newspaper. It was like the size of a newspaper. And they had a feature that was on Jeff. And they did a partial discography. And if you can imagine a newspaper that's about the height and width of the New York Times or, the USA Today or something like that. And this was the partial discography, and it was at least 2 full pages. And we're talking early 90s, maybe 93 or 94 or something like that. You wouldn't have to remember you got.
That's right. I used to write for that newspaper. And you're right. It was early 90s. And that was a beautiful thing. I still have copies of it here. So I think I have all of them because I was one of the writers for that newspaper. That was a great piece. It was.
Yeah. It was just so eye-opening because, most of the time, especially back then, the only way that you were going to be able to find out who played on records, kids, we didn't have the internet back then. You couldn't just Google it or Wikipedia it or whatever. And so you either had to buy the album, or at that time they had CDs. You'd have to buy the CD and look inside to see who played on stuff. So to have a resource like that you could go, oh, this Ricky Lee Jones record or this Donald Fagen record, or then you could go and very expertly decide how you're going to spend your money to buy that album or that CD. That was an incredible resource for me for years. I probably still have it in a filing cabinet somewhere, I'd bet. But I know for years when I was in college, that was a great resource for me to just start digging through. And I don't ever think I made it through that list.
Right.
There's too many tunes. So to me, that's a testament to the greatness of someone as a studio musician and it was all over the map. I mean, my list that I have of tunes to play tonight, I'll just name a few folks off. We've played a lot of different things, but still on my list, Christopher Cross, Dan Fogelberg. I have to play this Dan Fogelberg tune in a second because my wife's listening and that's her favorite artist. And if I want to, keep her happy, I'll play a Dan Fogelberg tune on my very first radio show, right? But Donald Fagen, Diana Ross, Elton John, probably the only cool songs on this particular Elton John album. Eric Clapton, George Benson, Jackson Brown, James Ingram, Lee Ritenour. Like Alan Toussaint. Like there's so many people. Where do you think the inspiration or the information came from for him to be so versatile?
Well, think about this, that he did all that before he was 38 years old.
Yeah.
First of all. And when he was in his early 20s, I believe, maybe he was still in his teens, but his early 20s, he became the drummer for the Sonny and Cher show. And at that time, I learned a lot about Jeff through his dad, Joe Picaro. I had interviewed Joe for magazine articles that I had written about Joe's career for a few different trades. And I interviewed Joe and spent a lot of time with him. And they, when they were kids, they would rehearse in Joe's house. And they were basically Toto before they were Toto with David Paiste and Steve Lukather and Mike and Steve. And they would basically have they had a band called, I think they were called Stillwater. And that was before Toto. And then Boz Scaggs got wind of them and brought them on board at his band. And then they, after playing with Boz Scaggs on some of Boz's very early things, then they formed Toto. They wanted to have their own band. But they were already all session players before Toto even formed. But I think, and what Joe and I talked about, what Joe told me, is that Jeff always had an extreme natural ability to hear it. His technique was natural. He had a natural ability to hear a song and know what to play for it. It was just one of those gifts. He had it when he was young.
Right.
And that's what he wanted to do. It's all he wanted to do. David Paiste and Jeff basically they started the whole Toto thing with Lukather. And they all had this gift. They all had it.
One of the tunes that I've got on my list to play, and this is a very, very deep cut, and it really speaks to Jeff's versatility and probably the influence of his dad, the influence of Joe. I've got a track I want to cue up called Lover of Love by Alan Toussaint.
Oh, yeah.
Which, if you don't know who Alan Toussaint is, there's an entire world of music that will open up to you when you just listen to one Alan Toussaint record. It will lead you down a rabbit hole that you will appreciate me for a long time, because there's a lot of great music. This particular tune, Lover of Love, is Jeff on brushes.
Yeah.
And when you think of Jeff Porcaro, you think of halftime shuffles, you think of all these very iconic kinds of grooves, but brushes may not be something you think of. And this is a great example of Jeff playing brushes and being really sensitive to a song. And I feel like what I hear the influence of his dad through this entire track. So let's cue that up. This is Lover of Love by Alan Toussaint. So a completely different gear from a completely amazing drummer right there. Jeff Porcaro with brushes on Lover of Love by Alan Toussaint. And I had to go pretty deep to find that one. Pretty deep.
That's a great track. I love that track.
It's just such a great feel, and you can definitely hear Joe Porcaro's influence, I think.
Absolutely.
Two things before we get out. The first thing I wanted to talk about was you've got a brand new CD out.
I do.
Called Dialogues. Tell me about your CD.
This is the second record I did. My first one I did in 2018 called Travels. It's instrumental music that on both of these albums I play the keyboard, all the keyboards, drums, and percussion. I wrote everything. Co-wrote a few things with my music partner. I want to mention his name. His name is Jonathan Clark. He's just a brilliant, best-kept secret in Los Angeles. He and I toured together with Glenn Frey. He played bass with Glenn when I was playing percussion, and we both sang background. And Jonathan is currently playing bass for Dwight Yoakam. So he's out doing Dwight Yoakam shows. But Jonathan is my secret weapon. When I come up with these ideas, these songs, and he can make it a reality. So the Dialogues was the first one. The second one I just came out with about a month ago called Dialogues, and it's a collection of different things. It's a lot of it was inspired actually by kind of my emotional upheaval with the pandemic. So some of it is a little more on the emotional dark side of things. Mm-hmm. and then there's some funk pop tunes on this record too. And then I dedicated this record to Joe Picaro. Actually, there's a song called "Ode to Papa Joe," and I've done my first video for the record for that song, which I played brushes piano on that tune, and that was the first tune that I had completed and sent it to the Picaro family around Thanksgiving when I finished it last year, and I'm really proud of that. So, but the rest of the record is a blend of different textures, and so there's some ballads on it, some funk tunes, some kind of world music kind of stuff too. I'm really happy with it, and it's available. Both my records are available as CD on Bandcamp, on my Bandcamp page, and then streaming in all the different platforms.
So if they just do a search for Rich Mangicaro, they'll find it.
Yep,
they'll find it. It's pretty easy to run across.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me and talk about the stuff and geek out in between the songs. We've geeked out as much while songs were playing as we did in between the songs. So I really appreciate your time.
It's great to see you. It's been a long time, and I'm really happy you asked me to do this, Brian. And I'm glad to be back in touch.
Yeah, definitely. We will be keeping in touch after this conversation, man. I've had so much fun. And I want you to tell me, Rich, Calling Elvis, that was one of the tunes that you listen to your top 3. What is it about Calling Elvis that you love so much?
Well, the groove that Jeff plays on this song, especially in the outro, Meshuggah feel. I remember when he talked about this, he actually talked about this groove in clinics, with very few clinics that he did, because Jeff didn't do very many clinics, but he talked about this and demonstrated it. As a matter of fact, that classic video that's out of Jeff? It's an instructional video. I think there's like one
Alex video. Yeah, I have it on. I have 2 copies. I have an opened VHS copy and a completely sealed VHS copy. I loved it so much.
Right on. Well, that was with Mike Picaro and with David Garfield.
Oh, okay.
Right, and they did that as a trio, and Jeff demonstrates this feel on Calling Elvis, and that's just always been one of my favorite things he ever did. And Jim Keltner and I talked about how great that is, that fantastic approach to that tune. To me, it's one of the coolest things he had done. I just love what he did for that song and for that band.
Well, man, let's fire this thing up. From the Dire Straits album, On Every Street, featuring Jeff Porcaro on drums, this is Calling Elvis. That's Calling Elvis by Dire Straits. And folks, that's the end of our show. I want to thank my very, very special guest for this debut episode, Rich Mangicaro. You can find out everything about Rich, including how to get to both of his albums, Travels and Dialogues, by going to richmangicaro.com. If you're listening to the recorded version of this, we'll have links below. You can easily get to that great, great music. And if you're listening to this live, thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of this debut episode. We'll be back every single Monday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on the AMP app. Please tune in live with us. Jump in. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be taking calls. We're going to be taking requests. We're going to be building in even more interactivity into the show. I really look forward to seeing you and hearing from you here on Drum Corner Radio. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you.